Welcome back, everybody. We're breaking down UFC Fight Night, Cannonier versus Strickland. It's the last fight card of the year, and it's actually a pretty strong card. We have had a number of fights fall out already, but overall still looking pretty good here. A fantastic matchup in the main event. The co-main event is very solid as well between Sergey and Ismagulov. Dober versus Green is looking like a pretty fun fight. Kape versus Dvořák, another pretty high-level flyweight bout. You know, not a ton of name value or anything on this card, but there are a lot of very exciting fights and a few decent spots as well. So without further ado, let's get right into breaking down UFC Fight Night, Cannonier versus Strickland. And in the first fight of the night, we have Sergey Morozov versus Newson. And Morozov is the minus 225 favorite. Newson is the plus 195 underdog. And we'll start with Newson first, who honestly still a bit of an unknown to me. I believe his background is in jiu-jitsu, but he's kind of developed a bit of a karate style on the feet. But the reason I say he's still a bit of an unknown is because there's just not a ton of relevant footage of him at the UFC level. He makes his debut against Ramos and kind of gets beat pretty thoroughly on the feet and in the grappling. He has a win and a loss, that ends within like the first 30 seconds of a fight. He takes a bit of time off and gets a win over García, who is not a very good fighter in my opinion. And on top of that, he is 33, which, while he's not old or anything, I feel like he is starting to maybe leave his prime a little bit, especially at this lower weight class. I haven't seen like really crazy improvements from him or anything, and really the only recent footage we have of him is against García, who, again, not a particularly good fighter. He's going to be up against Morozov, who I think is probably going to be one of the better fighters that Newsom's gone up against, probably on the level of a guy like Ramos. Morozov, he's a solid, pretty well-rounded guy, serviceable striking, but I do think he does his best work when he's able to mix in the takedowns. And he's pretty good at, chaining the takedowns together, controlling opponents, and just mixing it all together. But, I don't like how he completely imploded against De Silva. It looked like he may have had a bit of a cardio dump. In any case, I feel like he should be able to get it done here. He looked pretty good against Paiva, was able to be competitive in the striking, was able to mix in the wrestling at opportune moments to close out rounds and win rounds that way. And honestly, I think this is a bit of a step down in competition for Morozov. And outside of Newsom just landing a bomb on Morozov, I kind of struggle to see how Newsom wins this fight. I don't think he's got particularly great takedown defense. I don't think he's a particularly potent striker either. He does move well on the outside. It is kind of hard to track him down. But, I'm not really that high on Newsom, if I'm being honest. Whereas with Morozov, I feel like he's got maybe a little more potential, a little more upside here. I think that he could keep it competitive on the feet, mix in the takedowns when he needs to close out rounds and really put a stamp on it. So, official pick, I'll go with Morozov to win by decision, but really no strong opinions about this fight. And next up, we have David Dvořák versus Manel Kape, and Kape's the minus 235 favorite. Dvořák is the plus 200 underdog, and I really like this fight. A very high-level fight here. Probably one of the fights I'm looking forward to the most on this card. But we'll start with Dvořák, who is a very good technical striker. He's someone who moves very well, very good footwork. He's got a nice heavy low leg kick. Very fundamentally sound, very defensively responsible, and as a result, he can be a bit low volume, and I don't know if he's particularly great at winning moments either. And if I'm being honest, I don't think his wins are particularly great either. But on the other side of things, we have Kape, who is a pretty good technical striker himself. Very quick hands, good footwork. Can also be a bit low volume, but the thing with Kape is when he gets it going, he is very slick in there. I think he's a bit quicker between the two. I feel like he's also the more explosive puncher. I think he's a little more dynamic on the feet. And I do rate the overall experience and level of competition of Kape a little bit more at the UFC level. And even on the regionals, I think Kape's just faced far better guys. And even in his losses, they're pretty competitive. So in that regards, I do have to hand it to Kape. He did struggle a bit making the transition, early in his UFC run. But, Pantoja is a very tough fight, especially to be making your debut against. And I thought Kape arguably beat Nicolau, definitely put on a much better showing than Dvořák, all things considered. But on paper, I can see this potentially being a close fight. You have two guys who are, very skilled, very technical guys, both very good defensively. But right now, I just think that Kape is a little better on the feet, a little slicker, and just a bit quicker. And I feel like that it can potentially just be what it comes down to. If both guys are exchanging in the pocket, I think that Kape may just be able to land first, land a little bit cleaner. We did see Dvořák get dropped by Nicolau in his most recent fight, and I do think that Kape is a bit more dangerous of a striker than Nicolau, potentially a little quicker as well. That said, just given how Kape can kind of let fights slip away sometimes, I don't know if I could lay the minus 235 on him. He is a bit reliant on some of these big moments, and while I do think that something could get through against Dvořák, I'm not entirely convinced that Kape is going to be able to get the finish. And, I don't know if he's going to be able to get two knockdowns in two separate rounds for him to decisively win a decision here. But at the end of the day, I do think that Kape is going to get it done. I just don't know if the minus 235 is a good look here. So official pick, I'll go with Kape to win by decision. Wouldn't be surprised if he got the knockout, but, with Dvořák, he did show pretty good recoverability. I don't think he's got really any sort of chin issues at all. So, if this does go to a decision, if Kape isn't able to get multiple knockdowns, it may be a little difficult for him to win very decisively, but I think I'm going to still side with Kape here. I'll pick him to get it done by decision, and I feel like it could potentially be a close one. And next up, we have Rinat Fakhretdinov versus Bryan battle. And there is no line on this fight yet, so I'll break it down and then give my thoughts on it and how I would line it. But we'll start with Fakhretdinov, who is a grappler. Prior to coming into the UFC, though, I felt like he was a bit of a can crusher. And coming off of his last performance against Michailidis, I still hold the same sentiment. I thought Michailidis would be able to offer a little more resistance on the mat, but Michailidis just looked like complete dog shit in that fight. But overall, I'm still not really sold on this guy just yet. I think he's going to have to put together a few more good performances before I really buy into him. Battle, on the other hand, is someone I've kind of warmed up to a little bit more, right? I do think he's got some pretty solid tools to succeed in this division. He's a very tall, rangy guy with good output, good durability. He's a pretty effective kicker. He's got a good front kick. He's got a good head kick that, he knocked Sato out with. He's got good cardio. Defensively, he is a little hittable, but, he does appear to have the durability to fight the way he does. The takedown defense isn't particularly great, but he is hard to control. He's constantly working in there, and he's got takedown upside of his own. His win against Petrosky is one that's aging pretty well, in my opinion, and I feel is pretty relevant to this matchup here. So for that reason, I kind of am leaning battle in this fight. On the feet, I actually favor him at distance. I favor him to win minutes. And outside of just Fakhretdinov landing a big bomb standing, I kind of favor battle to take it on the feet. Potentially, there is a path for Fakhretdinov if he is pushing the wrestling and grappling. He could rack up control time, but battle has shown that he will make opponents work. He will put up a lot more resistance on the mat than I feel Michailidis did. And battle, he is someone who's capable of really punishing you if you start to slow down in a fight. And I do feel like if Fakhretdinov is pushing the wrestling and the grappling heavily, he will start to slow down. And I suspect that battle will be able to kind of outpace him later in the fight. It is worth noting, though, battle is the one coming in short notice for this fight. It's, I think, about 2 to 3 weeks out for him, which, isn't too bad. And from what I have seen, he does look like he's in pretty good shape. In fact, I'd say this is probably the best he's ever looked. I remember seeing him on The Ultimate Fighter, and even in his UFC debut, he looked kind of flabby in there, but now he's all shredded up. He's also very young, and, he's making improvements fight to fight. So I do like battle in this spot. As far as how I'd line it, though, I probably put battle as a slight favorite here, maybe around like minus 150. Just because I'm not completely sold on Fakhretdinov. I'm not saying he's a complete bum or anything. I do think he's got tools to potentially succeed here, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to keep up with the cardio of Battle. I think that Battle's better on the feet. I think that Battle can really make him work on the mat, and if Fakhretdinov isn't able to take Battle down and hold him down in the later rounds, I can see Battle maybe even pulling off a finish. So, official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Battle. I'm going to take him to win by round 3 submission. And next up, we have Rafa García versus Maheshate, and pretty closely lined fight here. García is going to be the slight favorite at minus 120, with Maheshate being an even money underdog at plus 100. And we'll start with the younger guy in Maheshate, who is coming off of a knockout over Steve García. Did pull off a pretty big upset on the Contender Series as well. Overall, he does seem like a decent athlete with a bit of power in his hands. Can strike a bit, but overall, I do think he's still a bit green. I think he's still somewhat unproven as well. He did fight in a very gritty performance on the Contender Series, but prior to that, he's really only crushed cans on the Chinese regional scenes. And overall, I feel like he still is just a bit unproven. And he's up against a guy who is a little more proven than García, right? 5 UFC fights already. Has fought, I'd say, much better regional competition. But with García, he is a pretty tough, gritty guy. Pretty well-rounded. Doesn't really excel anywhere. Striking's okay, but he's not a big power threat or anything. Not particularly high volume either. He is capable of mixing in the wrestling, but I don't think he's a phenomenal wrestler by any means either. He can push a pace though. He can make you work in there. It's just, I feel like overall his game, he doesn't have a ton of success if he's not able to successfully mix in the takedowns. And, he couldn't mix in the takedowns here, but Maheshate is a massive dude. There's going to be a big size discrepancy in this fight. We're talking 6 foot, 71-inch reach versus 5'7", 68-inch reach guy. And that's honestly what's making this fight a lot tougher to call, in my opinion. If Maheshate was a bit smaller, I would probably be all over García here. But, if García isn't able to take Maheshate down and hold him down, García could be in a bit of trouble. Because like I was saying before, I don't think that García is much of a striking threat on the feet, whereas I do think Maheshate is. But on the Maheshate side, I feel like there still are some potential question marks. I don't know how his takedown defense is going to hold up, especially down the stretch. I don't know how his cardio is going to hold up either, especially down the stretch. If García is really putting the wrestling on him. And overall, I do still think the game of Maheshate is still a bit green. But honestly, this is probably one of the toughest fights on the card for me to call here. I think Garcia's got the tools to succeed here, but again, he does seem just a little lost on the feet when he isn't able to hit takedowns. So I guess for that reason, I'm going to go with Maheshate here. I think that he'll be able to keep this fight standing long enough to put the damage on García. I don't know if he's knocking García out. Garcia's shown some really good toughness, but I'm not very confident in this fight at all. But official pick, I'll go with Maheshate to win by. I'll pick him to win by decision. And next up, we have a very compelling matchup between Said Nurmagomedov and Saidyokub Kakhramonov in a battle of the Saids. A very closely lined fight, with Nurmagomedov being a slight favorite at minus 120 and Kakhramonov being the even money underdog at plus 100. And I'll try to be extra clear with who I'm trying to reference in this fight as to not cause too much confusion. But we'll start with the Nurmagomedov side. So Nurmagomedov, more of a striking Dagestani than he is a wrestler. He can wrestle a little bit, but he does generally prefer to keep it standing, throw these spinning attacks, and overall he is quite potent when he lands. But I don't think he's a very good decision fighter. He can be a bit low volume on the feet. He can be a bit reliant on some of these big moments. And, he absolutely can put someone out when he lands. He does have a dangerous guillotine, but throwing all these spinning attacks does open him up for counters. It does open him up to being taken down. And I do think that low-key, his cardio may be a bit lacking as well. And, he's going to be up against a guy in Kakhramonov, who I'd say is a little more well-rounded. Someone who's got, pretty quick hands, decent counterpunching, but is a very good grappler in his own right. We saw him choke Trevin Jones out. He completely dominated Lawrence in the wrestling. Granted, Lawrence hadn't really fought anyone of note up until that point, but the way Kakhramonov was able to just completely wash him out on the mat was still just very, very impressive. Was able to spam takedowns in there and rack up a ton of control time over a guy in Lawrence who I consider to be a pretty decent wrestler and a strong cardio guy himself. And lastly, of course, he had that performance against Umar Nurmagomedov where he fought him very competitively, was able to stuff the takedowns. Wasn't able to get too much done on the feet outside of that knockdown, but I'd say to this day, Kakhramonov still has proven to be Umar's toughest fight. And I feel like it is a somewhat relevant performance as well. Umar, a very good kicker himself and a much better wrestler than Said Nurmagomedov. So I feel like, Said is potentially, more of a discount version of Umar. Obviously, different stylistically in terms of how they throw their kicks and the fact that Umar, I think, is a much better wrestler. But, it is worth mentioning that Kakhramonov kind of struggled a bit getting past the kicks of Umar and really getting in distance. But I feel like that is potentially a performance you can kind of learn from and build off of. And like I was saying before, Said is, I'd say, a little more reckless with his spinning attacks than Umar is with his kicks. But ultimately, I just think that Said Nurmagomedov is going to leave a lot of openings for Kakhramonov to take him down, potentially pop him with a counter as well. And I think that what it comes down to is potentially maybe just the cardio and the grappling of Kakhramonov. I think that if he is able to take Nurmagomedov down a few times, we will see the cardio of Said start to dwindle a little bit. Those kicks really do take up a lot of energy. We have seen Nurmagomedov slow down a little more in fights. We have seen Nurmagomedov kind of concede being on bottom as well. So I think that Kakhramonov is going to have opportunities here to hit takedowns and really push the grappling on Nurmagomedov. We saw guys like Dvořák have success on top of Said. We saw Barcelos do the same as well. Granted, both guys are veterans, whereas Kakhramonov still is a bit earlier in his career, but I do think that Kakhramonov's got all the tools to win this fight here. I do favor Nurmagomedov at distance. I think he's got a lot more finishing upside in this fight, especially early on. He's got a pretty sneaky guillotine. And if Kakhramonov is pushing the wrestling, he does have to be careful of it. But like I was saying before, I do think it'll come down to the wrestling and the cardio of Kakhramonov. And I do think he'll have what it takes here to win a pretty competitive decision. I think we see Kakhramonov kind of start to pull away in rounds 2 and 3. So give me Kakhramonov. Give me Kakhramonov to win by decision. And next up, we have Julian Marquez versus Deron Winn. Marquez is the -160 favorite. Winn is the +140 underdog. And we'll start with Marquez, who is a very wild, very pressure-heavy fighter, someone who will like to move forward and throw heat. Overall, not the most technical fighter by any means, but it does look like he's taken a slightly more measured approach in his most recent fights. Historically, he's been pretty tough, but he did take a ton of damage in his last fight. Did get knocked out by G-Rod in his last fight. Did also get dropped like 3 times as well. So, maybe the durability is starting to go, but we probably won't see it get put to the test here because he's going to be up against Deron Winn, who is 5'6". Might not even be able to reach the head of Marquez, at least not without taking a lot of damage coming in. But with Winn, obviously he is a wrestler, someone who could kind of just go in there and spam takedowns. Seems to have the cardio to be able to push it. But that's about it with him. He's not the most active on top, and because he's a lot smaller than his opponents, he kind of struggles keeping them down as well. So a lot of the time they're able to kind of just pop back up, and he has to go back to the wrestling to drag them back down again. And The thing is, even if he is able to get off on his game plan and hit multiple takedowns, it still can be a 50-50 affair. We saw in his win against Stewart, Winn had 6 takedowns in 8 minutes of control time. He still got outstruck, and he still lost a split decision. So even if he is able to hit takedowns and rack up control time, it's not a guaranteed win. But what does make this fight very interesting is that Marquez has really bad takedown defense. Anyone that's attempted to take him down has gotten it. And it's not like he's faced a lot of wrestlers either, right? Guys like Darren Stewart and DeCarico and even Maki Pitolo, all guys, largely strikers, have been able to take him down and rack up control time against him. Now Marquez, he will attack submissions, but he will also give up control time as a result. But going into this fight, he probably knows the wrestling is coming. With guys like Pitolo and Stewart, you can make the argument that they may have caught him a bit off guard. They're also pretty big guys as well, but going into this fight, he's probably going to have to be drilling his takedown defense and his get-ups. But ultimately, I'm going to side with Marquez here. I think he's got a pretty big advantage on the feet. I think the sub is a bit sneaky for him as well. He will attack the guillotine. He's got a nice anaconda choke. I think the club and sub is potentially live. And for what it is worth, Winn did take a lot of damage in his last fight. We could see Marquez kind of take a page out of the playbook of Hawes and start spamming those elbows against him, especially since Winn is going to have to close the distance to get in on Marquez. But really, what's keeping me away from the Winn side here is, even if Winn is able to hit takedowns and rack up control time, it's still going to be a pretty 50-50 fight. So, in the best case scenario, it's still going to be a pretty dicey fight for Winn. So I got to go with Marquez in this spot. I think there's a big advantage for him on the feet, and I just don't know if Winn is going to be able to do enough with the takedowns and the top control to really seal the deal here. So give me Marquez in this spot, and I'll actually pick him to win by submission. Like I was saying before, I think that Marquez does have a pretty sneaky submission game, and I think the club and sub is pretty live as well. So give me Marquez to win by round 2 submission. And next up, we have Jake Matthews versus Matthew Semelsberger. Matthews is the minus 235 favorite. Semelsberger is the plus 200 underdog. And we'll start with Semelsberger first. Semelsberger, pretty decent striker. Nice jab, a very sharp 1-2. Decent shots down the middle. He's got a bit of power as well, but I feel like we may have seen his ceiling a little bit here. You look at a lot of his wins, they're just not very notable. AJ Fletcher, Martin Sano, Jason Witt, Carlton Minus, kind of bottom of the barrel guys, if I'm being honest. And then his losses are to guys like Chaos Williams and Alex Morono, a couple of pretty good fighters, but not world beaters by any means. So I do think we may have potentially seen the ceiling of Semelsberger. Granted, he still is young. He could still be making improvements, but I don't know how much more he could realistically be making. Semelsberger's a decent athlete with good enough striking, but overall, I don't think his striking is particularly layered. Morono was kind of able to just dance around him and pick him apart. And overall, I just think Semelsberger's approach is just a little too linear. If it wasn't for the flying knee, it would have been a pretty clean 30-27 performance for Morono. But I will give it to Semelsberger. He is a dog. He won't quit in there. He is very tough and gritty, and he is someone who will fight for your money. But I have a feeling he potentially may just get finessed in this fight by Matthews, who has kind of fallen into a bit of a gatekeeper role, very similar to Morono, with maybe a little more upside, a little more athletic, maybe a little dumber. Maybe dumber isn't the right word, but I guess what I'm trying to say is Morono's probably higher fight IQ guy with maybe better game planning, but Matthews still a pretty good fighter in his own right, a guy who could kind of do it all, right? Decent boxing, decent footwork, good defensively, is capable of mixing in the wrestling and grappling. He's got the cardio and durability to back it up. He's fought some pretty good guys at the UFC level, has been around the block, and is still quite young himself. So I do think that Matthews has likely got Semelsberger covered everywhere. I kind of think that Semelsberger is largely knockout or bust. Matthews is, I think, the more technical striker. I think he's a lot more defensively sound, much better footwork, more experience, more well-rounded. Basically, he checks all the boxes here. Semelsberger's takedown defense and get up still pretty subpar. I think that's something Matthews could definitely take advantage of here, and I feel like that is something he'll potentially go to. But I honestly think that Matthews can probably just handle Semelsberger on the feet. But if things ever start to get out of control for him, I do think that Matthews does have a bit of a safety valve in the wrestling as well. And on top of that, I do think Matthews is the better cardio. I think that if he does decide to push a pace against Semelsberger, he'll be able to kind of overwhelm him a bit also. So I think this is a pretty easy pick, pretty straightforward here. I'm going to go with Matthews, and I'll take him to win by decision. And moving along, we have Cory McKenna versus Cheyanne Vlismas, and Vlismas is the minus 170 favorite. McKenna is the plus 150 underdog, and we'll start with McKenna first, who is a grappler that's actually been pretty active this year. I believe this will be her third fight in 2022. But again, she is someone who does generally look to grapple, does her best work on the mat. Had a pretty big letdown performance early in the year against Reed, where it just seemed like she wasn't aggressively going to the grappling enough. Was definitely a very winnable fight, but just kind of poor in-fight decision-making there. Was able to bounce back with a submission win over Granger. Looked very dominant, but worth noting, it was against Granger, who was coming off of a long layoff and is not that good of a fighter, if I'm being honest here. Whereas with Vlismas, on the other hand, definitely a much better striker than Granger, someone who I think actually has a decent bit of potential as well. And as far as women's MMA goes, I actually think she's a pretty good striker. She's got pretty quick, crisp hands, good combination punching, good footwork. Does seem to have a bit of pop in her shots as well. I don't think she's got like a ton of power or anything, but we do see other fighters kind of respond to the punches, and she does have good enough output and cardio to go 3 hard rounds. The takedown defense is good. She did have that really bad performance where she kept getting head and arm throwed, but I'm going to say that performance was a bit of an anomaly. I don't think that that's going to happen here. It would be really concerning if it did. She'd have to reevaluate her career if she got beat by the same move again in this matchup here. But in any case, I do give Vlismas a pretty big advantage on the feet. McKenna is kind of slow and plodding. I think she's kind of hittable as well. I think there's going to be a massive hand speed difference. There's going to be a big power difference as well. A big technical difference. I think it's going to be just night and day on the feet. Cheyanne, I think, has got much better footwork. I just think that McKenna's stand-up is still severely underdeveloped. For McKenna to win here, I think she's going to have to dive at the legs early and often. But I just don't know if McKenna's going to have a ton of success hitting takedowns and really consolidating control. But the reason I feel that way is because between the two, I feel like Cheyanne is going to be the better athlete. I think she's going to be a little stronger, a little more physical, and just combine that with her takedown defense and footwork, I think McKenna's going to really struggle closing the distance and securing takedowns. And on top of that, I think she's just going to be getting popped in the face at distance. She's going to be taking a ton of damage on the feet. I think it's going to discourage her from really rushing in, and she may even get hurt and have to panic shoot, which I feel like it can definitely snowball the fight in Cheyanne's favor. I don't want to completely write McKenna off here because there is a chance that maybe she is strong enough to convert those takedowns and rack up control time, but I'm not really seeing it here. I think that unless there's just a massive hole in Cheyanne's defensive grappling, I feel like she's going to be able to shuck off the takedown attempts and maybe even work her way back up if she is taken down. So official pick for this fight, I'm gonna go with Cheyanne to win a decision here. I just don't think that McKenna is going to be able to hit takedowns, and even if she is, I don't think she's going to be able to do enough with them to convincingly win a decision here. So I'm going to go with Cheyanne to be able to keep it standing and do enough damage to win the decision here. I wouldn't even really rule out a knockout. Cheyanne, not exactly a power puncher, more of a volume fighter, but given just how big of a gap there is on the feet and the likelihood of it, standing, I think that we could potentially see a TKO stoppage here, a bit of a mercy stoppage if McKenna's just taken too much damage. So I'm going to go with Cheyanne to win by decision as the official pick, but I would not rule out the knockout for this fight. And next up, we have Cody Brundage versus Michał Oleksiejczuk, and Oleksiejczuk is the minus 270 favorite. Brundage is the plus 230 underdog, and we'll start with Brundage, who's also going to be the short notice fill-in for this fight. He was initially slated to go up against Vieira, I think last month, so I suspect that he should still be in shape, considering, he has taken this fight. But with Brundage, he is primarily a wrestler. Seems pretty strong. He's got some nice takedowns against the cage. Very physical guy. As far as the striking goes, he's just very basic, very meat and potatoes. Can be a little low volume on the feet, and can load up a bit on shots. He is riding a bit of momentum coming into this fight with 2 finishes, one over Gore and one over Lungambula. But the fact is, he wasn't looking particularly great up until those moments, which is interesting because he's going to be up against Oleksiejczuk, who is someone who does start pretty hot early, someone who's very aggressive, looking to pressure opponents right out the gate. Oleksiejczuk, he does move pretty well in there. He does a great job of going to the body, and coming down to 185, he's not nearly giving up as much size as he was at light heavyweight, and it does seem like the power is translating here. Granted, it was against Sam Alvey, but he handled Alvey accordingly, dropped him twice and put him out in under 2 minutes, likely ending Alvey's career. But this is going to be a very tough fight for Brundage, especially on short notice. Oleksiejczuk, has kind of struggled a bit with grapplers before, but they were against pretty big guys at 205 and, pretty good grapplers in their own right. But on the feet, I give a pretty big advantage to Oleksiejczuk. I don't think Brundage has fought anyone close to the level of Oleksiejczuk or anyone as potent as Oleksiejczuk early. That said, Brundage does have a path in the wrestling, especially later in the fight. Oleksiejczuk is someone who does slow down a bit. He pushes at a pretty crazy pace, a pace that I don't think he could really keep up. He's been able to get a lot of first-round finishes, but in fights that he has been extended, he hasn't really looked that great. And getting down to 185, his cardio might not be as good either. And Brundage, he has kind of established himself as a bit of a comeback kid in his last 2 fights. And, there is a world in which, he gets hurt really badly in this fight, but doesn't get put out. Oleksiejczuk, is looking to swarm him, but unloads the clip, isn't able to get him out of there. And then come round 2 and 3, he's just completely cooked in there, and we see Brundage able to pull off another comeback. But I don't know if that's super likely here. Like I was saying before, Oleksiejczuk, I think, is going to be the most potent striker that Brundage has gone up against. He's going to be feeling power like he's never felt before against a guy in Oleksiejczuk. So I don't think he's going to be able to come back from this one. I think we see Oleksiejczuk hurt him early and look to swarm him and get him out of there by round 1 TKO stoppage. And moving along, we have Drew Dober versus Bobby Green. And Dober's the minus 150 favorite. Green is the plus 130 underdog. And another really good fight here. Very good matchmaking. Should be a fun fight between a couple of veterans. We'll start with Dober, who is a bit of an action fighter. I don't think Dober's ever been in a boring fight. He's got great Muay Thai, great footwork. He can put combinations together. He's really strong on the counter. And the guy's got an absolute brick for a head, which, he definitely leverages to his advantage. He'll pressure opponents. He'll definitely, he'll take one to give one. He'll make it a firefight. He'll make it dirty. He'll make it a scrap. But he's going up against Bobby Green, who really isn't much of a scrapper or a brawler. I think Green is a very slick boxer who does like to slip and move and counter and just look to pick opponents apart. Just be very flashy in there as his style. He's not someone that's going to trade in the phone booth with you. He does a pretty good job of defending. He covers up well, does a good job of, using his head movement. He's got pretty good volume himself. Doesn't have a ton of power in his hands, but, he is good at picking his shots, just kind of looking to touch his opponent and get out of the way. On top of that, Green can wrestle as well. It is actually where he started. He used to be a wrestler, and he hasn't really had the opportunity to really go to it in his last few fights. But he is a capable wrestler. Just looking over his opponents recently. Guys like Makhachev, obviously, he's not taking him down, right? Hack-Prast, he was just doing work on the feet, didn't have to go to the wrestling. Iaquinta knocked him out early, didn't have to go to the wrestling. And then Fiziev, he did try to wrestle Fiziev a little bit, but Fiziev, as we've seen, has just got really good takedown defense. But prior to that, I think Green was on a 8 or 9 fight streak where he's hitting at least one takedown in each fight. And a good chunk of those fights, he was actually landing more than one takedown. So I do think that if Green does decide he wants to mix in the wrestling, he can definitely have success here. Dober, historically, very poor takedown defense. Green, even if he isn't able to do too much with the takedowns, I think it's something he can mix in to keep Dober guessing in there, keep him honest. And I feel like in a fight where I think the stand-up is actually going to be very competitive, I think a takedown, especially at the end of the round, could definitely swing the fight, in Green's favor. So with all that being said, I do feel like Green is the side here, especially at, plus money. Green is someone that's very competent in the stand-up, is someone who is very hard to put away, very hard to look good against. I do like the volume of Green standing. I like his defense. And I think he's got the takedown upside as well. So I'm going to go with Green to pick up the win here. I think he's able to keep it competitive on the feet, not get blown out or anything, not take too much damage, and then mix in the wrestling to close out rounds and really put stamps on them. So I'll go with Green here to pick up the win, and I'll take him to win by decision. And next up, we have Alex Caceres versus Julian Erosa. And Erosa is the minus 190 favorite. Caceres is the plus 165 underdog. And this should be a pretty fun fight. Erosa fights usually do deliver. And the reason they do is because Erosa is a bit of an all-action fighter, someone who will move forward and pressure opponents, someone who will just look to set an insane pace, and he is capable of pushing it for 3 rounds. That said, it does leave him open for damage, and historically how he loses is, he's getting starched, he's walking forward, leaving his chin up, and opponents are able to find an opening in there. He does take a lot of damage as well, a lot of accumulated damage over the course of his career, but if you aren't able to put Erosa out, he is capable of just completely overwhelming you, especially later in a fight. And he's up against Caceres, who is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, right? A guy in Caceres, very elusive, very good footwork, very defensive, kind of likes to stay on the outside and look to finesse opponents. And typically with Caceres, how he's losing is he's getting submitted. Obviously, both guys have, lost decisions before, but I just kind of wanted to push that narrative a little bit there. And honestly, I feel this is, pretty good matchmaking. We have a couple of guys who have been around the block, and stylistically, it should be a very interesting fight because we have a guy in Erosa who is going to look to bring the pressure and the pace, but Caceres is going to look to, stay at distance, kind of matador opponents a little bit, pick his shots and use his footwork to stay safe. So very interesting how these guys are going to match up. With Caceres, I feel like he's actually a pretty slippery dude, a guy that's kind of hard to track down. And, if you look at Erosa's recent run, guys like Dawodu, Jourdain, Landwehr, and even Woodson, these are all strikers that are kind of willing to oblige him in the pocket. Caceres will give Erosa a stand-up fight, but I think he's a much different type of striker than these guys. Caceres, he doesn't have a ton of power, but he does do a good job of kind of just skirting on the outside and just looking to pick at opponents. And, just back to the power thing, though, I felt like that was kind of the case with Peterson against Erosa. I thought that Peterson was just not really a power guy, another, kind of slippery guy who's, not even that good, if I'm being honest, but he was able to to hurt Erosa and make it a very, very competitive fight, which does bring me to my next point with Erosa. Just the way he fights, he's a great dog. He's able to make fights really close, make it a really gritty fight. But if you're laying any sort of chalk on Erosa, you're going to be shitting bricks. This guy just fights close with pretty much everybody. And stylistically in this fight, I feel like it's not the worst fight ever for Caceres because, I feel like it's going to be kind of hard for Erosa to really track down Caceres in this fight. Caceres is not someone that's going to just brawl with him. He's going to try and, stay defensive in there. And I feel like if Caceres is smart about when he's going to sit down on his shots. He can definitely get the respect of Arosa on the feet. I don't know if he's knocking Arosa out, but if he does sit down hard on these shots, he's going to be able to snap the head back. It's not going to look good optically. And with Arosa, he does have a tendency to kind of keep his hands low and lean back to avoid shots, which, Caceres could definitely land a head kick on him. I say this a lot in all of Arosa's matchups, but I do think it's something that's always live against Arosa. I'm not saying it's going to happen here, but I feel like it is something that's kind of always on the table. And just a little cherry on top here, Caceres does have a nice sneaky little back take, which, if they do end up clinching up or something, if this fight does hit the ground, for some reason, I wouldn't be surprised if Caceres is able to kind of close out the round, just backpacking Arosa as well. But ultimately, if it wasn't clear by now, I am siding with Caceres here. I am going to pick him to pull off the upset. I think that just with how defensively lax someone like Arosa is, he does tend to fight really close in a lot of fights. And against a crafty veteran in Caceres, I wouldn't be surprised if Caceres was able to kind of finesse him a little bit to a decision here. So, official pick, I am going to go with Caceres to win by decision. And next up, we have Amir Albazi versus Alessandro Costa, and Albazi's the minus 425 favorite. Costa's the plus 325 underdog, and not too many hot takes here. Pretty straightforward fight, if I'm being honest. Albazi coming up against a short notice fill in Costa, but with Albazi, he is a pretty interesting prospect. I feel like he's had a pretty unfortunate run in the UFC in terms of like the scheduling with all of the pullouts. But I do think the guy's legit. He's a very good, very physical grappler. He's done a decent job of developing the striking as well. Kind of sucks that he hasn't really gotten too many high-profile fights. I would have liked to see him kind of solidified in that top 10 ranking, but now he's going to have to take on a complete newcomer in Costa, who is still a bit of an unknown name-wise, right? So, he's kind of risking it a little bit, risking his ranking. And with Costa, I don't think he's a completely terrible fighter by any means. He seems decent on the feet. He can grapple. Does seem to have a bit of power in his hands, but it can be a bit low volume. Looks to just kind of wing shots in there. But he can be back down. And overall, the level of competition really isn't that great. And with Albazi, outside of Zumagulov, really hasn't beaten too many guys of note either. And with Zumagulov, he is like 1-5 in the UFC. But I will say this, though. Albazi and Kape were really the only guys to definitively beat Zumagulov. All of Zumagulov's other losses were pretty close and arguably could have been wins. So I do rate that win pretty highly for Albazi. He's definitely going to be the way more proven fighter here. And I do think he's someone who's making improvements fight to fight. I think he's entering his prime now. Meanwhile, Costa is coming in short notice. I don't have too many hot takes here, unfortunately. I do think that Albazi gets it done here. I think either the knockout, sub, or decision are all live here. Honestly, I'm not really sure how good this Costa guy is off his back. I don't know how his cardio is going to hold up, especially coming in on short notice. But I do think he's got a pretty tough task ahead of him here. Official pick, I'm just going to go with Albazi to win by round 2 submission. I'm not sure if Costa's going to be able to keep up with Albazi in this spot here. I'm interested to see him a little more in the UFC level. I would like to see Albazi get that step up in competition, but as far as this fight goes, I'll pick Albazi here to get it done. And in the co-main event, we have a very high-level fight between Arman Tsarukyan and Damir Ismagulov. A couple of guys who have kind of flown under the radar a little bit, more so on the Ismagulov side, but I do like this matchup very much. Two very high-level, very technical and skilled guys who are finally getting a bit of the spotlight. Again, more so on the Ismagulov side. I know Tsarukyan's headlined a fight night card before, but Ismagulov is finally getting that step up in competition, at least ranking-wise. The guy's fought a ton of unranked guys who are quite dangerous, and now he's getting a chance to really climb the ladder here. But we'll actually start with the Tsarukyan side. So with Tsarukyan, he is a really good wrestler, someone who's very physical and capable of just spamming takedowns over and over the course of 3 rounds. The striking is coming along, but it is worth noting that he hasn't really fought any strikers. Just going over his UFC run so far, Makhachev, OAM, Ramos, Giagos, Frivola, Alvarez, all of these guys are primarily grapplers. Even against Gamrot, who, is a pretty well-rounded guy, but, Gamrot not really known for his striking. And it also is worth noting that most of the success that Tsarukyan was having on the feet against Gamrot was when he was slamming those body kicks, which, Gamrot is pretty susceptible to. But when Gamrot was able to switch stances, to orthodox, or Tsarukyan kind of was, struggling a bit more, having success. But this is a pretty interesting stylistic matchup for him because Ismagulov is actually a pretty technical striker, very good footwork and takedown defense, very good distance management, and just very good defensively overall. He's got a very measured approach. So on the feet, I can see him giving Tsarukyan a lot of troubles. I don't think he's going to hurt or knock Tsarukyan out, but I do think Tsarukyan may struggle a bit, closing the distance, getting in on Ismagulov without getting popped in the face, jabbed in the face a few times. But what makes this matchup so interesting is that Ismagulov hasn't really faced too many wrestlers either. He stuffed a lot of takedowns from guys like Guram and Moises, but I don't think those guys are great wrestlers, at least not on the level of Tsarukyan. So I feel like this is potentially a 50-50 fight in that regard. Overall, I kind of am leaning the Tsarukyan side. Ismagulov, he is a bit of a technician in there, but he doesn't really do a ton of damage. He doesn't really put stamps on fights, and overall, I feel like Tsarukyan could have just bigger moments in each round. I think he could land the bigger shot standing. I think he, could just have big moments with the takedowns as well. And with Tsarukyan, I feel like the guy is kind of a monster in 3-round fights. He did slow down a bit against Gamrot in a 5-rounder in the championship rounds, but over the course of 3 rounds, I do think the cardio of Tsarukyan should hold up. I don't think that Ismagulov has bad cardio or anything, but I feel like if you are able to push the grappling and the wrestling against him, make him stuff takedowns, try to work his way back up, I do think that he will slow down, in the latter portion of the fight. He did drop that last round against Alves. He did start to slow down a bit against Gutteladze in that 3rd round. So I feel like Tsarukyan can definitely push a pace here against Ismagulov that, Ismagulov might not be able to keep up with. So for that reason, I'm going to slightly lean towards the Tsarukyan side, but this is a very good matchup here. It should be a very competitive fight. So, I can see Ismagulov potentially being the value side. You're not going to get Ismagulov at plus money very often. So, I don't hate anyone taking a shot there, but I do think that we see Tsarukyan edge it out. But what I actually do like a bit more in this fight is the over, and the fight goes the distance. I think that both guys are very good defensively, very technical. Ismagulov is really not much of a finisher either. Tsarukyan really hasn't shown any sort of, durability issues either. So, I don't think that Ismagulov is finishing Tsarukyan. And I think it's unlikely that Tsarukyan's going to finish Ismagulov too. I think that Ismagulov, I think his takedown defense and his defensive grappling should be good enough so that, he doesn't get, pounded out or submitted by Tsarukyan. So I do kind of see this fight hitting the overs, but official pick, I'll go with Tsarukyan to win by decision. And in the main event, we have Jared Cannonier versus Sean Strickland. This is a pick'em fight, -110 both ways. A very compelling matchup between 2 strikers. Should be a fun one as well. We'll start with Cannonier, who is a very heavy-handed striker. Very dangerous, knockout power, obviously. He's got some very nasty leg kicks as well. Very much a power-based fighter. His volume, not particularly high, but because of his power coming the other way, he does do a decent job of limiting the volume of opponents. And he's going to be matched up against Strickland, who is a very pressure-heavy boxer, a little plotty on the feet, but he is good at walking opponents down and kind of just putting the volume on them. He does lack a bit of power, but I think he does make up with it with the volume that he brings. Defensively speaking, I actually think that Sean Strickland is quite good. He does get hit in there, but I feel like he does a pretty good job of blocking and parrying and rolling with shots. I also think Sean's got pretty good vision as well. Like you'd have to be, I'd say, a pretty crafty striker to land clean on him, like Zaleski with the spinning kicks, Pereira, who's an elite kickboxer and also the current champ. Which leads me to my next point. Sean is making a pretty quick turnaround for this fight after getting knocked out. But I will say this, though. Sean didn't get completely knocked out cold there. He ate Pereira's signature left hook, popped up, ate another shot, and then the ref waved it off. It was a good stoppage. I'm not denying that. But what I'm trying to say, though, is the fact that Sean was able to get back up after eating 2 of those shots is a testament to how tough the guy is. Those shots are shots that would put a lot of guys out cold. Izzy needed the oxygen mask. There was that guy on the regionals who was in the shadow realm for at least 7 minutes. Meanwhile, Sean's out here protesting the stoppage and posting memes afterwards. Granted, he probably was concussed, but still, the fact that he was able to not get put out cold in that spot, I think is actually a bit of a testament to him. That said, it is still a bit concerning, making that turnaround, especially against a big power puncher like Cannonier, but I feel like the chin of Strickland should still be intact. There is a chance Pereira may have completely ruined his chin, but I'll have to see it before I say anything conclusively. But as far as this matchup goes, I think it really comes down to the volume and defense of Strickland. I just don't think we're going to see Cannonier land something big on Strickland. Like, what I mean by that is, he probably will land some big shots, but, he won't land a shot on Strickland that Strickland won't see coming, which is typically how you put Strickland out, I feel. And if that doesn't happen, I can see Strickland potentially running away with it, with the volume. I will say this, though. I think the leg kicks could be an issue for Strickland. Cannonier does like to blast those. Strickland, I think he has had like a surgically repaired knee before, and he is kind of plotty as well. So we could see the kicks really start to limit the mobility of Strickland. But if they don't, I can really see Strickland start to run away with it later in the fight with the volume. And on top of that, Strickland does have all the takedown upside here. He made a massive blunder not going to it against the Pereira fight. I don't think he's going to make the same mistake twice. But Strickland is a capable wrestler. We saw him go to it against Uriah Hall. He was able to close that fight out in the latter rounds by going to the takedowns. Really just was able to seal the deal against Hall later in that fight in the championship rounds with some takedowns. And I think that's something that Sean could probably replicate here. Cannonier doesn't have the best takedown defense, and I suspect it'll probably be a bit worse later in the fight. So, official pick, I'm going to go with Strickland to get it done here. Assuming his chin's not completely cracked, assuming, he doesn't get just bombed out of there early, I think we see Strickland start to take over later in the fight. Not to say Strickland won't be winning early rounds as well. I think Strickland's pretty live to win the early rounds also, but I do think we start to see him maybe pull away later with the volume. I do think that Strickland may have a slightly better cardio at this stage in his career as well. So the pick is going to be Strickland. I think we see him pull away with the striking later and be able to mix in the wrestling as well to really close out the rounds. So give me Strickland to win by decision.